Building solutions at scale is very important, but not for everybody. I see a lot of hype on things like Rust and Golang and all these new really performant technologies and frameworks and solutions that allow your code bases to scale to millions of requests per second at really cheap rates, where if your servers cost you $100 million, you can get those costs down to $5 million. Exciting as it is to have these conversations, I don't think most companies need that. Even the big ones you might think do. I want to talk a bit about when it makes sense to hire specialists and do things the right way, because I don't think the right way is always right. Let's talk a bit about what I like to call the line of prime. So, there's a lot of things we need to think about when we build applications. The most important one is, does it solve the problem the user has? And that's not as simple a thing as it might sound. It's not just, did we get the right features out on this app? It's, did the features we pick make sense for the user? And did the problem we thought we identified need to be solved at all? It takes a while to know that your solution is the right solution, even at scale. And I'm talking about technically, is it the right solution? I'm talking, is the problem you solved correct? And is the concept of what you built right? And until you are sure that the way a thing is being used is the way it will be used for a long time, it probably doesn't make sense to write it using things that make it harder to maintain and iterate in the future. Because if you pick a set of features and then those need to change and you built it in something that's hard to iterate in, good luck, have fun. But I want to show this on a chart. So the way I like to think about this, on the vertical axis, we're going to have number of new features being built. So when something starts, it probably starts really high in terms of the number of features being built. And we'll have on the axis here, amount of use the service gets. When a new application is being started, you are almost certainly starting here. And as you get your first users, you're going to be constantly changing what feature set you have. It is very, very rare, even at a big company, that when you build something new, be it a product, a feature, a service, or any of these things, that the first time you build it, it's going to be built correctly. It's really hard to be certain. So it's important to pick our technology accordingly. And as we go over time, what I almost always see happen is the number of new features needed goes down as the number of users goes up. And over time, we'll see a trend something like this, where number of new features and amount of iteration on the core of what you've built goes down as the amount of users goes up. So if we were to point at something like Ping, the video call service that we built for streamers, when we first started, we didn't even have our core big feature, the browser embeds. So we were constantly trying out new things, new ways to integrate with OBS, new solutions for building that layer. The rate of new feature building and general iteration on the code base was really high. Over time, the number of new things we were building started to go down. Our focus was less on new features, more on stability, and the amount of requests going to our services started getting a lot bigger. It's not big enough to justify making significant changes, but you will eventually get to a point where that is the case. Another way to think about this is there is a line somewhere, and it's going to be different for every code base and every company and every use case. There's a line somewhere here, horizontally, where you can save a lot of money. Where before this point, if you're using a suboptimal solution, like let's say you're using a really slow, old TypeScript code base. On the left side here, your server costs might be under 100K a year. We'll say under 200K a year. And on the other side, it might be over 200K a year. And if you have the possibility of hiring a person who can rewrite the essential pieces that are being run enough to cost this much and can pay their salary just by porting this over, that's probably worth it. But that will likely come at a cost in terms of how fast you can move. And at that point in time, you might actually have to stop new feature development entirely. So for some projects and some developers, the point where you are no longer iterating on features might be really early. And you might have something like this where you've stopped building features, your costs get too high, you rebuild to move to the optimal technology. You can still add new features, you're probably not doing it as much, and it's probably not as fast to do, but you also have to hire more expensive people to do that. And generally speaking, some technologies allow you to move with small teams very quickly, and other technologies let you move with bigger teams slightly less quick. Every company and every project should think about what their long-term feature creep and iteration is going to look like and define a point where it makes sense to start converting things. I think that point is usually going to be both vertical and horizontal, where you're like, okay, our API is stable. We now know we're always going to return these things. So if we have like an API endpoint that returns a user object, and we wrote that in TypeScript, and now that user object's being called from that endpoint hundreds, if not thousands of times a second, and our TypeScript endpoints are being scaled across Lambda and are costing us thousands of dollars a month just to get this user object. We could cache it and do lots of other things. We could also rewrite that endpoint because we know the API is stable. Once we're confident about what a user is going to look like, and we don't necessarily need it in the same code base that we're fetching from, we can start moving out these individual things as they cost more. So think of this almost as the stability of what you're building and the API layer of what you've made against the amount of use that it gets. Somebody said, isn't the x-axis just time? And it is absolutely not time, because some projects will scale to millions of users using really simple tech without any cost if they're just static deployments in the end. But there are some projects that do crazy things like machine learning, where 100 users could cost you thousands of dollars a month. It entirely depends on what you're building, how much this x-axis even exists, much less how much it costs as you traverse it. Because for some companies, as the amount of use goes up, their costs don't go up a lot, but for others, they go up monumentally. For us at Ping, the costs of our services haven't gone up a whole lot, even though we've been DDoSed for terabytes upon terabytes of traffic in minutes. And that's because the models that we've built with, the caching that we're using, and our focus on building simple solutions keeps our costs and our iteration speed really low. But I could absolutely see a future where we want to rethink how we're doing that and take certain things we've built and move them to a more performant solution. This line that I drew earlier, what I like to refer to this as is the line of Prime. I call it that because our good friend of the channel, Primeagen, is a fantastic person to hire when it's time to start saving money. The difference here is Prime is who you hire when you're trying to save money. But there's also arguably a line here, which I'll call the T3 line. Or I should call it the Theo line. And this Theo line is the point at which I, and my way of building, stops being as useful to you. If you, day one, are building an API and you know exactly what the shape of that thing is going to be, and you never have to worry about changing it in the future, you don't need to listen to most of what I say. Most of what I say is for people who aren't necessarily sure that the thing they're building is going to be correct next year. And they want to be able to iterate quickly, make mistakes, and clean them up fast, and onboard new engineers and new team. You don't know if next year your team's going to be 0 people or 20 people. So you just want to get moving and get there. That is how my technical decisions are usually made. It doesn't matter if you're a small company or a big company. Every project has some amount of uncertainty this way at some point in its development cycle. And I like building around that because it's our role, especially as tech leads, to prepare our teams for the uncertainty that makes the job so hard. So there's a point here where I would argue above this line, everything Theo says is very useful. So in this range here, Theo makes really good advice. In this range here, Theo's probably doing more damage than good. In the same vein, on this side, Prime is absolutely incredible, and his way of doing things needs to be listened to more. I've heard some horror stories of obvious, huge money savings he could bring places he works that were declined because leadership didn't understand his role, arguably. And when you hire somebody like Primeagen, the best thing he can do is identify inefficiencies in your systems and correct those to save 10 times his salary every couple months. And that is a great reason to hire somebody like him, to make the company and the team more efficient while also reducing costs and finding a balance there for things that need to scale. But on this side, before your costs are at that point, I don't think his advice matters as much. And I get a little bit heartbroken when I see startup after startup building relatively simple web apps using Kubernetes and Rust and Golang and Terraform and all these technologies. Even big companies adopting those things in places that doesn't necessarily make sense. I'm surprised at the number of big companies that have recognized this and are starting to use stuff like Create T3 app in production. I know at least 2 FANG companies have explored and used Create T3 app for some internal stuff. And it's really cool to see that even big companies recognize that these lines exist, and it's important to understand that. I see Tej saying I'm conflating Prime stuff a bit because he doesn't recommend Kubernetes, which is great. And I also don't recommend Hasura. And there's definitely things that fall on this side that I think are terrible technologies and I push back on really hard. There's a lot of those, but it's the essence. Like T3 is, for better or worse, on the same side here as Hasura is. And I don't like Hasura, and I really like T3. Whereas over here, I would argue that Rust and Kubernetes are here. And that's not because I think Prime likes both of these things. It's because I think both of these things solve problems that you don't have when you're getting started. I'm not saying these problems aren't real. I'm actually saying these problems are very, very expensive. And an engineer like Prime will probably make a lot more money than me in his career as an engineer because he is solving expensive problems. I'm arguably solving people problems. My tech is largely picked based on the teams that we're working with and the needs of the people, both that we're serving and the team that's building it. Whereas the focus of somebody like Prime is more, how can we not blow up our service every time we ship something new? How can we have our first 10 million users on a new thing and not have it fall fall to pieces. I also saw somebody mention this top right corner is you're screwed, which is absolutely true. This corner here is a nightmare. There's kind of a political alignment chart here where we'll say right here is tons of traffic. Here is zero traffic. And then on top here is fast iteration. And down here is slow iteration. And what I would argue is where I live is this corner, and where Prime lives is this corner. And that is not a problem. Where I get concerned is when people live in these other corners. Like I've seen a lot of people out here where they get no traffic and they're building gigantic things they don't need to, like Kubernetes for your blog would be here. And up here would be Google Sheets as DB for a production service. This is roughly the alignment chart I'm seeing here. And again, to be very clear, this good, this also good, this pretty bad, this very bad. Does this help? Have I made it clear how I think about these things? I'm actually genuinely asking. I hadn't thought about this diagram ahead of time. Tej made a fair point that there is arguably a z-axis of does it keep working over time? There's two types of does this still work over time. There is as the traffic goes up, does it crash or not? And there is as people go back to this code base in 6 years, can they iterate in it or not? And both are very valid concerns. And I address the primer much more than the latter. I have code bases that are a year old that I don't want to touch because there are new patterns I like much more. And going back to the old patterns just makes me sad. And that's absolutely a real problem. I create a decent bit of tech debt. Fuck. Should I reframe this as in defense of tech debt? That might be a good framing. So I said, if you read this correctly, Theo's authoritarian left and Prime's libertarian right. No comment. So one thing I do want to clarify more is people keep saying that like cost should be an axis. No, tons of traffic entails scalability, cost, reliability. That's what I'm assuming when I say tons of traffic, is that your need to care about these three things starts to matter a lot more. And when I say fast iteration, what I mean is finding product market fit, quickly fixing bugs, moving targets, unsure of, or just, I can just say uncertainty in general. So like if you don't know how many engineers you're going to have, how well this project's going to do, how well received it's going to be, if it will even be approved or not, if users are going to like it or not, if users are going to use it a lot or not, if users are going to use it at all. When you don't have certainty in what you're building, iteration speed matters much more. That's everything from bugs to team size to users. Uncertainty means you should be iterating fast. Once you're more certain, you should be comfortable picking technology where you iterate slower. People are saying Prime can iterate fast. He can, but he fundamentally cannot move as fast as what the ecosystem in TypeScript, for example, enables. And things like Vercel and what they allow me to do. I'll give you guys an example. I'm going to write some code now and then scale it in a way where it costs me 65 cents per million requests across the entire world. And I'm going to show you how easy it is for me to do that using my stack. And this scales to 1 million requests a second or 1 million requests a year, and it costs me accordingly regardless. So let's go make an endpoint that we can scale to a lot of people. There's already one here. We're going to make a new one. Just do test, new file, route.ts, export const runtime equals edge. Export const get equals async, and we can do whatever we want to with this request. This is just a hello world example, obviously, but I can do a database call in here. I can use something like PlanetScale's database.js to read and write SQL commands. I can validate that all in here. I use this type of syntax to make a lot of API endpoints a lot of the time. And now that we have this working, I can add that working API. I'm not even going to test it because I know it's going to work. And then I can npx vercel deploy. I don't usually use the Vercel CLI. I just use GitHub, but it's easy enough to do. Put on my personal, existing, edge demo. I need to modify. Yoink, yoink. And in not too much time, we should have a service that's deployed to the edge. Creating the production build now, any moment now. Oh, I left type checks and linting on in the project on Vercel, so that's why it's a bit slower than my builds normally are. I try to aim for builds under a minute as often as I can. Take 1 second to deploy on Dino deploy, sure, but the code wouldn't be minified. Build steps are fine. Build steps are good even. Should be done now. Cool. Edge demo Kappa. That's actually hilarious that it happened to pick Kappa for that. And now, hello world. And this runs on edge dynamically on every request, can scale to millions of users. So if the DDoSer is watching, go ham. It's not permission. You shouldn't destroy my endpoints for fun and shit. But the point I'm trying to demonstrate is like, if this was to be spammed, which it probably is going to be, we're fine. It will cost money, but it won't cost that much money. And it lets us move that quickly. We can very, very quickly spin up and scale services to millions of users without really leaving our dev environment at all. And I want to emphasize that point in particular. I'm not saying Prime is a slow engineer here at all. He's an incredibly talented engineer that ships shit very, very quickly, despite a lot of the technologies he uses. I'm not saying that Rust makes you inherently slower than TypeScript or that Rust is a worse language than TypeScript. I'm saying Rust makes you consider things more and deeper as you're building. And the ecosystem for Rust packages just isn't moving quite as fast as things are in TypeScript land. Not just packages, but the deployment systems, the things like Vercel. If there was a Vercel of Rust that was making it really easy to 2-button click, deploy things at scale, that'd be dope, but it's solving a different problem. It's solving the problem of making sure your service is performant, memory safe, and can run forever. Another thing I would argue is on this side, something like serverless makes a lot of sense. And here, well-orchestrated VPS makes way more sense. But serverless lets us not worry about our systems as we iterate anywhere near as much, but it will cost us more money. But over here, you'll have to move slower because you're deploying services and worrying about the relationships between them and making sure you have enough services and that you have a gateway that can spread traffic accordingly across all of these different services and all these other things. It's important, no matter how big your company is, that you're willing to adopt the technologies that let you move at the right speed for what you're doing. There is the harsh reality that some projects just happen to start on this side. And like a lot of what Prime does starts over on the right here because he's working at Netflix and Netflix has pretty insane scale that they're working with. And most of what Netflix is doing isn't building crazy revolutionary new features or trying to find if this thing they're building is worth it or not. But I would argue with like the video game stuff that Netflix is doing, they should probably be on this side a lot more because that's very experimental and they don't know what will or won't work. And from what I know, the video game stuff that they're doing at Netflix very much does live in this side of things. And that has been how they treat it. When you're trying to figure out how to scale your service that you know works, the core video infrastructure, and you want that to be cheaper because it costs you $100 million a year, doing things this way is not optional. It's irrational to not do it. And I want to make sure when people take advice from both Prime and myself that they're considerate of where we live in these dimensions when we do that. That's the goal of this very specifically is here is where in the product lifecycle I make more decisions. And this is where he in the product lifecycle makes different decisions. Somebody asked in chat, is move fast and break things really best for society? Yes, absolutely. Without question, it is essential as a society. The rate at which things have improved now that we're able to confidently fail and catch up, that we have computer systems that are so powerful that bad code can run well. I think I've made it pretty clear where I stand here. Move fast and break things is not just for startups. It's for anybody who's not certain that the thing that they're building is in the perfect, correct, exact state. That's what this section is for. And then down here is once things are stabilized. My ideal, and I've brought this up before, if the products that I've built do well, then I want to have to hire Prime. I want my products to get below this line and across this line. Everybody's goal should be to be where Prime is here. Everyone should want this for everything they build. You should aspire to get here, but you shouldn't pretend you're already here when you're not. These sections are too common, and these sections are very good. Somebody asked, is there a rule that keeps track of when you should move from left to right? No. I think almost everything should start on the left unless you're starting with a lot of certainty. On the top here is uncertainty, on the bottom here is certainty. The left here is low cost, and on the right here is high cost. You move when your costs go high enough and your uncertainty gets low enough. Somebody said the line has a lot to do with the capabilities of your engineers. Absolutely not. I think the specific point where it occurs might, but I would argue this is more about like the hiring decisions, where from this point onwards, the way that we hire needs to be a little bit different. Like right now, I'm hiring people that I find off GitHub doing crazy things with TypeScript. But in the future, I might need to lurk Prime's community to find really performant, optimized people to take a service that we have that's dying all the time because it's getting hit too hard and have them show up and help us iterate on that. While in the corner, Mark and I are still building crazy, chaotic new things. And that balance is really hard to find. I don't agree that this is a capabilities thing at all. I think this is like a hiring thing more than anything. Yeah, somebody said start small and grow carefully. I couldn't agree more. And that's not just for startups. That's also for small teams at big companies. More and more companies are moving to vertical slices where they have teams with a back end, a front end, and a designer all on like one vertical team building things their own way and integrating with the company, maybe using some tech, maybe bringing some of their own. Like I know Prime uses Solid.js at Netflix, and I know Netflix is not shipping Solid.js to users because again, different teams can build their own small verticals that solve the specific problems they're trying to solve. And he knows that using Solid.js lets him move faster with a mental model he likes more than React and not have to worry as much about performance issues that he might have had to worry about in React. And I think that's a good way of thinking. You should have a CTO that understands this and lives on the side that you're on and can confidently grow and hire people on the other side when you get there. And that's what I think we have right now. Mark Mark and I are very confident we can do crazy things up here, and we're doing some really crazy things up here. But there will absolutely be a future where him and I have to look at each other and be like, yo, this sucks. We need to rewrite this in something faster than TypeScript. We need to rewrite this in something more scalable and cost sensitive than Lambda. But neither of us want to do it. Who do we hire at that point? And I trust Mark to be realistic with me when that time comes. And I hope that that time comes. I genuinely do. I would love to cross the line of Prime someday, but I don't think many people have. And that's why I'm so concerned. I see way more projects in this top right quadrant than I see in this bottom left one. Actually, I opposite. I see more projects in this bottom left quadrant than the top right. And that's why I'm so scared. I don't want people adopting technologies for problems they don't have. I want them to solve problems, be confident in those solutions. And as their confidence builds and as their user base grows, that is when you change your methodology with these things. I think that's all I have to say here. This has been a fun rant. It's a thing I think about probably too much, but I wanted to formalize this concept of the line of Prime and how we think about technology choices as I build my own things and as I advise other companies in how they build too. Show this to your boss if you're being forced to use Kubernetes somewhere where it doesn't belong, and let me know how that goes for you. If you want to know more about why Kubernetes in particular is not a solution to much, I have a video about how it's a liability up in the corner there. Really like that video. Also go into send to your boss. Good chat as always. Peace, nerds.